Awesome. Thanks,
Awesome.
Dakota, for sharing more information about the work that you're doing. I'll go ahead and pass it over for you to walk us through your presentation.
No problem. And it'll be pretty quick. I'm just going to kind of give you a background on some of the other neat stuff and kind of tell you what we've been doing. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, so I'll kind of keep it like a quick and informal. But what we've been working on is this program called Environmental Science and Peace. So we've been in collaboration with the New Gen Peace Builders. And the New Gen Peace Builders is a nonprofit organization that focuses on educating the next generation of peace builders. And that means people that are going and advocating for peace and also working to solve what they call violences or challenges in their communities and have discourse and dialogue that helps alleviate those violences and tensions, figuring out what tensions exist and how they can solve those problems. That is very, very similar to design thinking and to the processes that go along with understanding really what is an issue that a community is facing and how can you solve that in a way that doesn't cause more problems, right? So it's really neat that you know, the background that Footprint has and my team has in design thinking can merge together with this peace building nonprofit organization to be able to link together environmental science and peace and help students be able to understand that link and then put environmental education into action. We're doing that through the AP Environmental Science course. So we've created a set of curriculum that go along with the AP Environmental Science unit of land and water use. And with that, students are able to understand the link between environment and peace. They're able to do a design thinking project where they can address those challenges that they learn about for each one of the subunits within that unit. And then they're also able to have case studies that they can go through that show how other students have made an impact and turned their environmental education into action. So it's really, really handy. Another key player in this is the Institute for Economics and Peace. They're a very large organization that has created the Global Peace Index, which is where we have a kind of like a standard that shows what countries are at risk for different peace-related challenges. And then on top of that, they've recently released this program called the Ecological Threat Register, which overlays which countries are facing the highest levels of ecological threats and how those ecological threats can put those countries at risk of collapse. So what you'll see, and what we've noticed and what we've been able to draw the link with, is that there's a very large correlation between countries that are facing challenges that are ecological threats, as well as ones that are facing peace-related threats too. So it's been a really, really awesome program. That's just kind of the quick overview. This is the kind of stuff that we've got in it. We've got the professional development and support, the design thinking project, and the content and the curriculum teachers can use, the case studies, ecological threat register. And then of course, we also have the Footprint app. So students can do this collaborative climate challenge to be able to have 30 days to reduce their impact as a class and then form more sustainable habits together. So really exciting opportunity to be working with them. Right now, one of the big things that we've been trying to understand is how can we, you know, expand the impact on education to be able to help students turn their education into action and then kind of form the next generation of climate advocates so that people help kind of build a culture of sustainability and climate action wherever they go in life, whether they are, you know, just doing it outside in the world as advocates or whenever they go into companies and work to try to create that, you know, mindset shift, even in the places you'd least expect it, kind of like how, you know, I'm working at Shell, right? So it's really neat to be able to work with students to be able to show them that they can make that impact wherever they go. All right, so I'm gonna kind of skip through a lot of this stuff. I think the next piece, I'd really recommend that y'all check out the Ecological Threat Register. So that, I just kind of sped through a lot of the information about it, mainly because usually I do this presentation with someone from IEP that can present about it. So I'm not gonna butcher their material. Instead, I'd rather just recommend that you check out the Ecological Threat Register. You can see that they've got a lot of really interesting stuff in here. It covers 157 countries, 97% of the world's population, projects out to 2050, shows 8 areas of ecological threats. And it measures resilience against the positive peace framework, like I was saying before. It kind of shows the correlation. So very, very neat tool there. And then, you know, just as a background, I'm sure you all are familiar with climate change, but one of the big things that we try to focus on is the individual impact that we have. The average person emits around 17 tons of CO2 each year. That, you know, over 5 billion people, even though we have maybe around close to 8 billion people in the world now, the percentage that are really concerned about climate change is very high, right? So there's over 5 billion people who are concerned about our climate future. And then what we see is that there's a disconnect between the people that care about climate change versus do something about it. And so that's a really big concern that we see. And we try to figure out why. So we see there's pain points. It's difficult to measure. It's hard to experience. It's hard to, you know, see what a ton of CO2 looks like when it goes into the atmosphere. And then it's also kind of inconvenient and confusing, kind of like if you're, you know, on a diet, right? So that's why we created Footprint. It's kind of like your diet tracker or MyFitnessPal, but for climate action. We've, you know, from pilot results, we've seen a 10% reduction in CO2 from people taking these activities and doing challenges to be able to reduce their impact, and forming a community to be able to compete and reduce their carbon footprint together and form those more sustainable habits. So, you know, that's where we see like challenges and competition. We also have it gamified. We've got a leaderboard, have it within their organizations so that they can form that organizational culture as well. But yeah, so I just kind of wanted to give you all that overview so you could kind of see what we've been working on. That's pretty much the majority of the story. Right here, you just see a picture of some of the students that we've been working with. One of the teams that I got to work with was from Charlotte, North Carolina. They're on the right of the screen, and they worked really, really hard to be able to understand the impact of food that we eat and how we can educate other people on food sustainability. And then they helped create an entire lesson that we've included in our program for the AP Environmental Science classes, as well as incorporated a lot of learning material that we now have in the Footprint app too, so they could scale their impact beyond their community too. And they've also started doing like a local community garden within their school. So lots of really, really neat stuff where students have kind of been able to bring this action into play. But anyway, well, that's kind of the main thing that I wanted to share with you. I'll just kind of showcase. I'm gonna probably go ahead and end sharing my screen and just open it up to like questions and discussion. And then Michelle, I'll kick it back over to you to, you know, lead the remainder of the activities.
Thank you so much, Dakota. I'll let others comment, but I just wanted to note that one of the things that I really, even what you just shared, is that a lot of individuals, when they think about when they're trying to launch something, sometimes they're really disconnected from the people they're trying to serve, or sometimes they get away from, yes, initially they might have been really connected to the problem and it caused them to act and want to develop something, but then they get far away from the individuals that they're trying to serve, and it sometimes causes even more challenges for the development of that solution. And one of the things I noticed with the work that you're doing with Footprint is that you are intentionally making that community interaction as a core element of your development. And I love that you're doing it in schools, you're doing it with different age groups. I just want to commend you on that, because as social entrepreneurs, like, we're obviously very passionate about the problems that we're solving. But one of the other pieces that's super important is that we continue to be inclusive as we are developing and innovating those solutions. So awesome work.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So thank you so much, Dakota, for sharing all this. As you were talking, kind of like, you know, in the kickoff, I was multitasking, and I did the the calculator about to find out how much my carbon footprint is, and let's see, it was this number, this many's. And I was wondering, you know, so if I purchase an offset, what does that mean? Like, what does it actually do? What is a TerraPass? Can you describe that a little bit more?
Yeah, yep. So a carbon offset is pretty much a credit that you get for reducing carbon in another way. What that means is, so if you purchase a carbon offset, you are putting money into a project that will abate carbon, whether it be through destruction of greenhouse gases directly, such as maybe like freon destruction or something like that, or through some kind of agricultural project that helps draw carbon into carbon sinks. And so say, that can be as simple as, forest restoration and management programs coming up, or doing a wetland restoration project where the grasses are maintained and grown to where they end up sequestering more carbon into the soil through their through the land management techniques that are going on. And so whenever you pay for a carbon credit, it essentially helps you pay for the management of some ecological restoration project or greenhouse gas reduction project that will then be the equivalent of the amount of CO2 of, say, for example, your carbon footprint or however many tons of CO2 that you purchase to offset. The big thing about that is there's a lot of concern on whether or not carbon offsets are credible, depending upon where you get them, what they're doing. So the big thing that we do is we look for partners and collaborators such as TerraPass that are verified and have verified carbon credits and standards and can show you how they abide by the Clean Development Mechanism, which is a governing body that shows you how to actually have legitimate carbon credits. And they do processes that are lower risk for the carbon calculations being off or being damaged and destroyed by some other process, such as like a fire or something like that.
And so let's say if I can't afford to buy carbon offsets, what are some DIY things that would actually have more of an impact? So if you had to rank, if you plant a tree, that would actually make more of an impact than if you recycled, or, like I don't know, what are the top 3 things that people could do that would have the most impact on their carbon footprint?
That's a great question, Grace.
Yeah, so if you were trying to reduce the amount of CO2 that is in the atmosphere just by doing your actions, the best thing to do is really avoid flying. And I think we've been doing a good job of that lately. But flights have a really high carbon footprint. So doing things like, changing your daily behaviors can really reduce your carbon footprint. And so that's what the footprint app is supposed to do, is help you figure out how to take those steps to reduce your impact. Another thing is changing your diet to have to be more vegetable intensive and less meat intensive, especially red meat intensive. So even just switching to white meats and fish can reduce your carbon footprint from the food portion of your carbon footprint by around 50%. And then on top of that, if you are eating vegan or vegetarian more frequently, it can reduce even further. So that's a really huge piece that you can do to reduce your impact. And then eating locally sourced foods also helps reduce some of the supply chain emissions from your carbon footprint. But the other big pieces where you get your carbon footprint from are from your energy use too. So if you've got a renewable energy plan for your home, that can drastically reduce your carbon footprint. So those are kind of like the steps that you can take that may be kind of low cost in comparison to buying a carbon offset or something like that. Like changing your electricity plan to be like maybe a cent or 2 higher per kilowatt to have renewable energy can reduce more than likely purchasing a carbon offset for the year. So those are some other steps that you can take to not have to spend as much on reducing your impact, and doing it in a way that directly reduces your impact today instead of through financing projects that may take a couple of years to grow or something.
And Dakota, one of the slides in the deck that you shared, it actually was showing the percentages of ability to do something towards climate action and then not doing something towards it. I was actually curious if we could briefly kind of talk through that as a group, because I was part of one of our conversations, part of the Impact Hub Global Network that was having this conversation. And one of the discussions was that for some individuals, depending on where you live, thinking about climate action and then all the things that you need to do for it, sometimes it's not really an option because you're thinking about survival. you're thinking about like, well, I need food, I need, how am I going to be able to provide for my family if you live in a super low economic type of location. But for that type of individual, it's a sense of like, I need to meet my needs first, and then I can think about it. But how does that, like, I'm just curious to bring that conversation to the table to see what everyone's thoughts are on that, and how we can, I love that you shared some of those like steps that we can take today, so that if we do have the intention, at the least, here are the things we can do. But I just wanted to bring that, open the floor, I guess, if anyone had any thoughts on that mindset.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'd love to kind of hear what the other attendees think on, you know, how to manage that, right? How to manage the difference between, you know, your own personal needs and like your Maslow's hierarchy, right? Of like short-term but urgent versus long-term but also pretty important, right?
Like one of the examples to give more color, right, on clothing. So I can only, as an example, right, well, I can only afford clothes that's not expensive, and that might mean I need to go shop at Walmart. But obviously we know that it's not the best like option in terms of like their business practices, etc. But to be able to afford a brand that's like renewable materials, etc., that might not be an option for that individual depending on their economic status. So that was one of the examples, just to bring more color into the conversation.
Yeah, one actually really good point that I think a lot of people may not think of is you don't have to always buy new. Sometimes, you know, giving something a second life is even better, you know. So say shopping at Goodwill, of course, but also companies like Plato's Closet have, you know, very, you know, nice offerings that are secondhand, and you can get like really, really fancy stuff. I actually had a challenge with some of my friends around Christmas time, where we went to Goodwill and had $40 and had to get a 3-piece suit and shoes and make it a good outfit so that we could go out to a fancy dinner. And we did pretty well. We hunted at a few Goodwills and got some stuff, but it was nice. And the jacket that I got was probably the best fitting jacket I could ever find. I was surprised. So there's a lot that you can do to pinch the penny and also, you know, get a reduced impact.
You have a doppelganger out there, Dakota, that is also a conscious consumer and appreciates circular life cycles for products, it sounds like.
That's awesome.
For you. Initial thoughts to Michelle's question from before. I don't have the statistics in front of me, but my understanding is that first world countries and those that are financially, economically well off tend to be the highest carbon, those with the highest carbon footprint. Like I said, I don't have it in front of me, but that's what I feel, and that's what I've read in the past.
Yeah. So I think like the United States, it's 4% of the population, but 15% of the carbon emissions or something like that. We produce like way more.
Sure. And I think that there have been some equitable, or at least attempting to be equitable, solutions that are placing limits on carbon footprint of different countries around the world depending on their status in the world economically. So I think that that's a good first step, but I agree with you, Michelle. Oxygen mask analogy, you need to be able to survive in order to, you need to biologically be sustainable before you can be environmentally sustainable. So I wouldn't hold those people to the same standard that other people should be held to.
So one of the reasons I brought this up, because I wanted us to talk through a little bit of what are like some of those pain points that are like making someone not take a step towards climate action. And because Dakota, when we were speaking earlier, we talked about potentially having a conversation around two different topics. One being, how can we bring environmental education to K through 12 grade and in terms of for the students, right? And the other being how can you bring the culture of sustainability to the workplace. So I love that in your example earlier, first of all, you're already working with some of the students that are, well, youth, you're already working with youth. And then you're also, maybe, I don't even know if it's intentional or unintentional, but like you're already preparing them so that when they do go whatever route they take after they finish high school, they have that mindset and it's in their core versus this thing that happens after the fact. So I don't know, should we jump into one of those topics, maybe the K through 12 thing, or what do you think, Dakota?
Yeah, I think it would be really neat to kind of brainstorm how we can prepare the next generation of activists to keep that mindset wherever they go.
I think the challenge when it comes to environmental justice is that we live in this like very circular codependent society, in the sense that like one of the things that prevents individuals from riding the bus versus driving is because we're dependent upon cars, and because we're dependent upon cars, we create a society that caters to that dependency. But then because of that, it kind of becomes circular, to the point like I ride the bus almost everywhere. I live like a mile away from my job, so I can walk to work. And like that concept to people is just like taboo. Like people be like, what? How can you live in Houston and not have a car and not drive? And it's like, you know, we can't, it's hard to encourage people to be environmentally friendly when affordable housing isn't a thing. So they move to the suburbs in order to find affordable housing, but then they're going to need a car in order to drive from Houston to Pearland and vice versa. So I think that's kind of the harder part to sell, especially like telling someone to not eat a burger every week or something like that is one way, but I think addressing some of those like society, like cultural structures that reinforce the dependency on practices that aren't particularly healthy for the environment.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And one of the big things that we've noticed is that like climate impact can like disproportionately affect those in marginalized communities and in lower income areas too, just because it's so much more difficult to adapt, right? And to be able to take those actions. In some ways it can almost be seen as a luxury, right? And that's like a systematic challenge that we see. Yeah, that's another really good thing that we've been addressing as we work together with the New Gen Peace Builders group, because that's like a lens that they look at, you know, when it comes to climate action and equity. And that's a good point.
I'm trying, just quick comment, I'm trying my hand at being carless in Houston too. So I'm right there with you now. Not easy, but I'm thankfully, I think similar to you, decently centrally located, so I'm able to get around. Only a mile and a half from the new Impact Hub headquarters downtown. Launchpad.
Yay!
Yeah, a short bike led way.
But I think, Niall, what you just did is it's part of the solution. I think a lot of times people will immediately respond to any challenge with, well, I can't do that because of this, right? But the more that you know, and you can say, well, instead of thinking about it, you can't move to the suburbs, you know, you can't get it, like you can't use public transportation because you need to move to the suburbs and therefore you need to get a car. The changing how you frame the problem, you know, is so important, because then you could say, rather than advocate for better roads, you could say, well, how do we make more affordable housing closer to where you work so that you won't have to move out to the suburbs? And I think that if we had a better grasp of what this systemic problem is and all the different pieces that play a part of that, then it's easier to say, well, you don't have to fight about, you know, wearing a mask. You need to fight about better healthcare. You need to fight about, you know, people just like, you know, basically, right? Like what are the pieces that you can redirect people to look for solutions towards versus just focusing on the problem that's in front of them.
Mhm.
This is one of the reasons why I really like looking towards the Sustainable Development Goals as like a metric, because they're interdependent. And so we're having the conversation about SDG 13, climate action. But one of the sub-targets of the SDG is building knowledge and capacity to meet climate change. Doing that through, right, improving education, awareness raising, and so on. And when we say raising awareness and doing education, it's not just about the impacts of climate change. It also includes the conversation we're having right now, like what are some of those barriers? And then it might take us into some of the other SDGs, but ultimately they're all interdependent. So that's one of the other reasons why I love using those as a metric, and why I love that we're having this conversation, because it came out naturally with us saying that to begin with.
I think another way of engaging more young people into the conversation too is just like making it sexy. You know, like if people think that upcycling clothes is cool, then they're going to upcycle more clothes, you know. But if it's having the latest, you know, new thing and going shopping all the time and buying, you know, fast fashion, then that's what they're going to move towards. So I feel like, how do you make these types of topics and that kind of behavior more exciting? I think the what's happening with the maker spaces across the city, and more people looking at how, you know, how do I DIY stuff? How do I grow my own garden? All of that kind of stuff. That's really exciting to me, because it's showing people there's another way of doing something. I remember when recycling became a big thing. I think it was like in the 80s in the US. I just remember going to the Philippines, and they had no choice, right? Everybody had to recycle and had to reuse plastic tubs of butter for Tupperware, and, you know, all of those things. Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
Right. So like all the places that don't have these first world problems, they've solved some of those problems. We're creating more problems. So how do we like make it more appealing to people who have grown up in consumer culture, to think about, you know, the way people have been doing these things for generations, have been upcycling, reusing, and all that for generations. That's actually a way of being a better ancestor. And then how do we aspire to be better ancestors versus just having the latest hot new thing?
We got to find some like 14-year-old kid, and then set them up with a TikTok account, make them an op, and do TikTok challenges. That's what we got to do.
That actually would work so well. And I wonder if anyone's already doing that, so we can amplify those TikToks.
It was like an AstroTurf TikTok challenge. I don't know.
That would be awesome. That could be a footprint thing, a footprint campaign.
There you go, Dakota.
Actually, actually, yeah, we had an intern who was a high schooler. I think she was 14 or 15 actually, and she had proposed that we use TikTok in the classrooms to get students to do those kind of challenges. And she's joining us back as an intern in about 3 weeks to help us with marketing and outreach. So, hey, you know, that solution, but it actually might happen. So, you can't beat them, you know, join them. That's it.
I love it. So if we can move just for a few minutes then to the conversation about how can we create the culture of sustainability in the workplace. Now, most of us, well, actually, it's a combination right now in the call. Like there's individuals in our community that are like fully in entrepreneurship, and typically sometimes that means you have more liberty to like kind of set your own premise and set how you're developing your company, developing your partnerships, etc. But when you work in a corporation, sometimes it's not as easy. So what are some thoughts around that? How can we develop this culture of sustainability in the workplace, regardless of where the workplace may be?
So one thing that they actually did at my job, and it was actually completely unrelated to like sustainable goals, it was actually a COVID preventative measure, is they removed all of the plastic cutlery and then sent us all metal cutlery, with like the Yes Prep kind of swag. It was like a swag bag, but with like Yes Prep silverware. And it's like, you know, they were like, use that when you come into the office instead of the plastic stuff, just so that people don't like congregate around particular areas. But it's like, on the other hand, it's like, oh snap, like that's a sustain. Now we don't have to buy plastic stuff anymore. We can just like use the metal, you know, use the metal stuff that's reusable and washable and all that stuff.
Yeah,
That's super
it's
cool. Oh,
I'm sorry.
Go ahead,
I was
Dakota.
going to say the same thing. Go ahead. Go ahead, Grace.
I was just going to say that's super cool because then you're also incentivized to take care of it because now it's yours, right? Versus just something you're going to throw away.
Oh, that's a good point. I was going to say that it's also kind of neat to see that that's like I guess a positive impact that comes out of the remote working situation in terms of sustainability. Like that's another big thing that we've seen was like just the environmental impact from remote school and remote working um, has been an upside to the situation that has mostly been not so great, right? So I think it's really neat to kind of be able to see some silver linings in some of this stuff.
One thing that I was introduced to, actually one of my clients that I'd met in Metro Atlanta, they are an IT hardware recycling company. And so I was able to connect our agency and our older technology as we phase it out and be able to provide it to them as opposed to sending it to the landfill. I wonder if there's general maybe sustainability consultants that can connect the dots for companies that are trying to do good, especially when it comes to waste management. And those recycling companies, upcycling companies to be able to put that waste into good practice.
All great points. Thank you guys for being part of this conversation, for providing your views on some of the topics that we discussed today. Before we wrap up, I wanted to give you another opportunity, Dakota. What's next for Footprint? How could we support? And any parting words that you have around this conversation?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, no, I appreciate that. With Footprint, we have been launching into the AP Environmental Science classrooms, right? So this program, we've created all the curriculum. It's ramped up and ready to go. Actually, on Saturday, we're having our first professional development session for teachers. So we have, I think, over 50 teachers from across the country signed up to use our program. Which, when you think about, how many students that could be, they probably teach on average around 100 students. So that's a huge impact, which is really, really cool to see. And we're recruiting even more teachers. So if you know advanced placement environmental science teachers, or even other educators in maybe IB or honors environmental science or anything in that space, share it around. That's the one thing. We are also doing a ton of sponsorship outreach. We know a lot of companies are kind of strapped for cash, but some of them somehow have a residual budget related to sponsorship that they were going to give that they didn't because the world shut down. So we're kind of trying to make the most out of that and find companies that are looking for programs like this to sponsor that can help teachers address some of the challenges that they have with virtual education, because all of the materials are virtually accessible. It's environmental themed, so companies like EDP Renewables, for example, and Intuit, we've talked to them already and they're interested in sponsoring, but we're trying to get more outreach to companies. So if you have any warm introductions you could give us to be able to talk to some of these potential sponsors, whether they're small businesses that can maybe throw in $1,000 here, or large organizations that can throw 10 or more. We've got a lot of recognition and opportunities to be able to collaborate with them to showcase and give them some benefit back for their sponsorship, aside from good feelings and tax deduction. There's a lot of other great things that we can do with them too. Outside of that, we are starting corporate pilots sometime late November. We've got a call for proposals. So if any companies that like corporates and stuff, want to try to have a tool to create that culture of sustainability, we're doing corporate pilots. We actually have Baker Hughes and Schlumberger signed up for it, which is kind of neat. And we've also got chats with Microsoft to be able to do something similar. So any other companies, even if they're small businesses or organizations, sorry, I'm starting to lose my voice, want to work together with us. I've been talking so much. Want to work with us and do a pilot for that kind of tool. It's free. We're just letting them test it out, see how they like it, and see if it's a tool that's valuable to them, so we can get that feedback and iterate and make sure that we're also addressing the corporate market for forming culture sustainability as well. So those are the key main areas. But I guess last thoughts and notes, like I think it's super inspiring and awesome and exciting to be able to meet other people that have a very similar mindset of what can we do to address not only just the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, but also like essentially saving the planet, right? So it's really cool to see that. It's cool to see like the mindset of circularity while also taking into account equity and how that treats people and how people are treated, and how there's a lot of disproportionate challenges associated with society, and it's not just a clear-cut easy solution, right? So the more people that I can talk to about that and how to solve problems and identify the real root cause, it's so cool to have those kind of conversations and think outside the box. So thanks for having me. Long story short, and I'm really excited to see what we accomplish.
Thank you. And would anyone else like to, I guess I'm inviting you, if you'd like to do a quick checkout of how will you be leaving today's conversation? Is there anything that you're going to take, that you've taken away, that either you're going to go and do some more research on, or any particular commitment that you want to set for tomorrow? Like not even for, you know, the rest of the year. Let's think short term. I open the floor if anyone would like to share.
I think I can go first. I think for me, some of the things that were reviewed that I already knew about in the back of my mind, but things that I can improve on a personal level, I'll try to implement. For example, eating more vegetarian food as opposed to eating meat-based food is a small step that I can take to make a big difference in my personal footprint.
Well, actually, that's a great way to close up the session. I did want to let you guys know that in November, we'll be hosting a climate action hackathon that is called the Climathon. And so maybe this conversation might have sparked something in your brain that maybe will work towards a solution. And so there will be certain challenges that get announced later in this fall, and you could potentially participate to help solve those. So just keep that in the back of your mind. We'll be sharing more information about that, and then we might also be looking for volunteers as we develop the Climathon further. But with that, thank you again for joining today's conversation, and I can't wait to the day for these to be in person again. But for now, in the virtual world, from Impact Hub to Houston, thank you all for joining, and have a great rest of your evening.
Thanks, everyone. Good chatting.
Thanks.